Um, Go ahead and take the roll. So Chair Silva's here. Keith here? There he is. Hazel? No? Marcus? Hazel? Where's it? Oh, you got to stay here. Oh, okay. Hazel. Marcus is here. Saskia's here. Mary's here. Hossam. Chris is here. Steve Lodge is here. Jody, Beverly, and Teresa. I saw her walk in. Where did she go? Right in front. I don't have, these are my reading glasses. Sorry. Okay. Let's go ahead and have public presentations. I have a card from David Carey. David, if you want to go ahead and go up to the podium, you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you, committee members. My name is David Carey. I've handed out a memo. I hope everybody has a copy. If not, I can provide it. One of the things I wanted to address that's in that memo that I don't believe is on your agenda otherwise for tonight is the issue of an interim election method, what you would use in 2018, or if RCV was not available in 2020, what you might use in place. My understanding is the committee has mostly talked about using kind of the default general law method, which if you're electing 2 people would be a vote for 2 election method. And one of the things I wanted to suggest is that you instead use a semi-proportional method. I will call it a single non-transferable vote. And essentially it's, if you're electing 2, it's just a regular, looks on the ballot, it looks like just a regular vote for 1 election. You're only allowed to vote for 1 of the people. It's semi-proportional in that it allows smaller groups of cohesive voters to elect a fair representation if they are adequately well organized about how they do nominations and coordinate their votes. In that regard, it's better than the default general law method in terms of providing representation, and it has the advantage that it can be done with your existing equipment. It's something that from a voter perspective, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference, that it's not just a regular vote for 1 contest, except that in 2018, you'd actually be electing 2 people. So it's something that provides a better method and doesn't have to deal with any concerns about whether you can upgrade voting systems and that sort of thing. So that's why I'd like to recommend it, and I offer some suggestions in a little bit more detail about that in my memo. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
Hi, Steve Chesson, President of Californians for Electoral Reform. I'm not sure if the discussion on item 4 is going to be restricted just to the residency requirement and office abandonment, which is why I'm speaking now. In front of you, you have a memo that I wrote that I sent to the city attorney about clearing up an ambiguity that you have in the charter, proposed charter amendment, and I hope you will take a look at that. My colleague David Kadlicek could not be here, but he also sent a memo to the city attorney and to some of the members of the Charter Review Committee about the residency requirement, about whether what happens if somebody moves when they out of the district, or if the district lines change while they're still elected. And basically, Elections Code says for general law cities that when the district lines change, that does not affect their term of office. But there's nothing in the code that covers the charter cities, so you need to put something like that into your charter. And finally, I just want to support what the previous speaker said. What he called single non-transferable vote is what I described to you as limited voting, where even though you're electing 2 people in your transition, voters only get to vote for 1 person. And that is a semi-proportional system that lowers the threshold of election to just 33 1/3%. As I've discussed before, I've presented information about thresholds of election. And that would allow a cohesive minority to elect a candidate of their choice. Thank you very much. Oh, and that might help, that might satisfy or assuage some of the concerns that the plaintiffs in the lawsuit have, and might help assuage them so that they wouldn't challenge the fact that you're not going to district elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Has everybody received the handouts? Okay. That's for item 4. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Do we want to take a minute to look over them real fast? Why don't we? There's one from Steve, and then there's also one from Mr. Carey. Okay, so Steve, Steve, can we get? There's one. So why don't we take a few minutes to look these over, if that's all right with everybody? Okay. Everybody have a chance to at least brief it? I think there's some interesting points that have been made in some of the language, and I guess we can get there when we get to item 4. But prior to item 4, we need to go to 3, which is approval of the minutes from October 5th. Okay, Keith made a motion. Anybody second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? 3 abstentions. Okay. So let's move on to item 4, review the approval and revised draft charter amendment. So I'll hand it over to the city attorney.
In your packets, there's a new version of the draft. I made the changes, I think, that we talked about. However, on page 3 of my memo, which is section 700.1, I want to propose a couple of other changes because I've had a chance to take a deeper delve into the state statutes. And I think it can clear up a lot. Government Code Section 34871 actually defines the term by districts. So the term by districts as used in this article shall mean election of members of the legislative body by voters of the district alone. The term from districts shall mean election of members of the legislative body who are residents of the district from which they are elected by the voters of the entire city. So in order not to have any confusion at all, I'm suggesting that we not use the word from in the first sentence, that we say members of the city council shall be elected by district, period. Then the next sentence would start, there shall be 2 districts to be known as District 1 and District 2 with elections to be conducted as follows. I don't really think we need to do this. We're kind of in the belt and suspenders stage of charters drafting here. I mean, I can keep all this extra language that we have about shall nominate and elect, but I think that's pretty much captured by the using the term by district and with knowledge that that's what it means under state law. But and I can also add the words after in D, held in November 2022 and each election thereafter. And in E, I can add the words in this section 700.1 and in section 600. I think these changes that I'm suggesting right now could take care of all the concerns that Mr. Chesson is expressing. Again, I really don't think there's that much ambiguity, but I think changing the word from to by district would clarify a lot in this section. And then there's blanks on page 4, so I was just going to add the section of the elections code that talks about the standard method of election in the elections code. I wanted to bring also to your attention that under Charter Section 700, 700, the city adopts the, I don't know how to do this. Okay, under Charter, can you hear me? Okay. Under Charter Section 700, the city adopts the state elections code, except where it makes different sections. So these points about general law cities versus charter cities don't necessarily apply because we're actually adopting the elections code in terms of how a lot of the provisions operate. So, so that's what I think we're kind of finished on this one. But if there's any questions, I'll entertain them.
Some?
I have a question on 702.b. So I know we had discussed about, until the registrar of voters, if they don't have ranked choice voting, and until they do, that we'll continue to elect the way that we do right now, which is a plurality. Is that covered in the elections code section blank?
Yeah,
That's the plurality that we
that's
currently
the
use?
election code section I'll insert there, is
Okay,
plurality
so that's a
vote.
plurality, basically.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Jody?
The change that you mentioned in 700.1D, where you said you were going to change it to say in the election to be held in November 2022 and after,
And each election thereafter.
except that that paragraph is only talking about voters of District 1. But it's the next paragraph that talks about,
Yeah, so that says in or after.
but it doesn't say, where does it say that the voters of District 2 get a chance to vote?
The whole purpose of these is to deal with the issue of what the terms are. So it really doesn't matter. It's simply to say you need 4-year terms and 4-year terms. It's because we're having this 2-year term that we have C, D, and E. It's just simply meant to explain that.
Okay. Because of C, it talks about it. Okay, I see it.
Tino, can I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
So just one other thing on 700.2B, I think the point is that Steve and David made is well taken, that if we say ranked choice voting or single transferable vote, it's unfortunately very slightly unclear. But could we make a very small edit there, such as putting a comma after ranked choice voting and say also known as instead of or, and then a comma
Okay.
after vote?
Or just adopt what Steve suggested, which I think is a universal way of how it's referred to. It says the single transferable vote form of ranked choice voting.
I don't have a preference.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
Sure. I
Brian?
mean, I understand. I think since this is going to be adopted by ordinance, I think it's fine. However we want to write this is fine. It's just simply meant to tell the council this is how you write the ordinance
Right.
with this in mind.
Okay. Okay, yeah, Keith?
So do we need a motion to?
Yeah.
Okay, so, motion,
So do you want to make one sweeping motion for all the changes, or do you want to do one by one?
I was going to do one,
One at a time?
I don't mind, or we can have a motion to talk to. Okay. Motion to, with the changes made and discussed with interim city attorney Doyle, recommend eventually to the city council that these charter amendments be placed on the ballot for adoption in June of 2018.
Second.
And are you saying that everything that we've also talked about, as far as the little changes that we've made, those are
Yes,
included in
with
your
the
motion?
with the changes that have been discussed recently
Okay.
at this meeting.
Okay, is there any
That
further?
text is provided in the packet provided before the meeting.
Got it.
Further
Before we go to public presentation, is there any discussion?
Yeah. There was some, I think, talk in this memo from David Carey and an email I got from Dave Kadlacek about just mentioning, having in there a line, maybe it's in section 600, about what happens when a district line is drawn over a sitting council member, just acknowledging that they can continue their term until they're up for reelection, and then they have to switch over to the other district. Or is that not necessary?
Is that covered in the state law?
Again, it is covered in state law. It applies to general law cities, but we do adopt the elections code. But I don't have a problem with adding a paragraph specifically to state that. You know, when they redraw these districts, what's happening is you're being elected to the new district, but until the district is actually changed, you know, there's kind of a philosophical question as to aren't you still in the old district until the new election has taken place? But if it would make things clearer, I don't have any problem adding a paragraph similar to what the the sender of the email has suggested.
Okay. Any other discussion?
And then just one final thing is if Brian can be really clear about what you intend to do with 700.1 D and E, just if you can spell it out a little more clearly.
Dot D and E?
700.1D? Is that what you're talking about?
D and E, like what do you intend on changing in D and E, just a little more
Yeah,
clearly?
so D would read, in the election to be held in November 2022 and each election thereafter. And then again in E, it'll say, in each election held in or after November 2024, council members who meet the qualifications set forth in this section 700.1 and in section 600 of this charter shall be elected for a 4-year term. So if you go back up to the top, it does say by district. We're changing that to by district. So it'll be
there
very
is an
clear
issue.
that we're not intending to jump back to something else in E for 2024.
I think the reason I ask is I think, I know you're intending to do the right thing there, but I think with the way you worded D, in each election thereafter, it's not each election thereafter, it's every other election thereafter, because District 1, because
Well,
D specifies District 1, where E does not specify a district. So just to be clear, D, District 1 would only vote every 4 years, not every election thereafter. So,
Well, if for the election for that district, it would be every
Yeah,
election.
District 1 would be every election for District 1 thereafter.
We're only talking
just
about
saying let's
election
be-
for District 1.
but it wouldn't be every election thereafter, it would be every 4 years thereafter.
I could add, and each election for District 1 thereafter. I mean, I think it's pretty much understood, but if it would make people feel better, I could add that.
Yeah, why don't we add that just for the sake of
Okay.
moving forward? I think that's a good recommendation. I mean, it is
Just so it's
pretty.
not, I don't want to confuse people. I know we
Yeah.
all get it, but just so it's
Yeah,
not
I
to
mean,
confuse people.
I think it's pretty straightforward what the intent is here. I don't think, because people just aren't going to be able to vote. If they're in District 1, they're not going to be able to vote in District 2. So it's
I
kind of
know,
implied.
I get it. I'm just making sure that it's
Okay.
super crystal clear to all voters. Potentially, you could in E, as was suggested by Steve, but I don't think it's 100% necessary. Where in D, you specify District 1 every 4 years, you could potentially in E specify District 2 every 4 years, and that covers both groups of people.
So why don't we go ahead and just add that? Brian, can we do that? Just add those two little things there?
I'm not sure about what the second one was.
Just in E, do the same thing as in D, and every 4 years thereafter.
I think in the email from Steve, it's pretty clear. I think E
D,
is
I
okay.
understand. What do you want to do in E?
Same thing.
That you would say, in the election to be held on November 2024 and every 4 years thereafter, the voters of District 2, blah, 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 blah.
Well, I already say that. I say in each election held in or after November 2024.
And every 4 years after.
It just simply says, all sentence E is meant to say is that everybody has a 4-year term. Anybody in any election, any council member, okay? Doesn't matter which district they're in. E applies to both districts.
I get it.
600 defines the two districts.
Guys, we're all on the same page here. I get it. I'm not debating what our intent
So
is.
I don't want to put District 2 in there because it would make it more confusing.
Okay. D and E then are somewhat redundant then, because you could eliminate D and then just keep E with at 2022, but that's nitpicking, I guess.
Does anybody else have a thought on that?
You get what I'm saying, Tino?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
I mean, if you're gonna be specific in D, because E can cover every normal election after
Yeah.
2020. So if you're gonna be specific in D with District 1, you might as well be specific in E with District 2, and then they both cover the whole city, or just eliminate D and put E alone starting at 2022 and and just it covers everything. But whatever makes it clearer to voters who are gonna vote on the charter amendment. Either way, the intent is the same. I just want to make sure that it doesn't confuse anybody. But that's just wordsmithing.
Jody, you had your hand up, right? Okay. So I actually hear what Brian's saying. I actually hear what you're saying. Brian, would it make sense just to move F up to into, I'm sorry, E, eliminate D, and then just put, just put in each election held on or after November 22nd? Would that be the easiest way? I mean, I understand what Hassan's saying. He wants to simplify and make it very straightforward. But I also get what you're saying is that E is really just stating that it's a 4-year term.
E is meant to vary C. We put E in because we wanted to make sure everyone understood that in District 1, you would no longer have any member that has a 2-year term. So I do think it's important to keep E as a separate section, just so we can make that clear. Because this is really about, really C, D, and E are all really meant to deal with the issue of the length of the terms and deal with the staggering issue. And so by putting too much into them, I think you might lose, and I think we're starting to lose that. We're starting to lose that was the original purpose of writing it this way. I'm not saying this is the only way you could write it, but this is the way we originally thought when we first wrote it, that it would make the most sense to break it out each election so that people could really see that, okay, in C, there's these people being, there's 4 people being elected.
And one of them only has a 2-year.
One of them has a 2-year term. And then in D, you're going to have 3 people elected for a 4-year term, and in E, you're going to have 3 people elected for a 4-year term. So that was the sentiment we were trying to get by writing it this way.
Which I don't disagree. I think it's great that we be very clear so that people know that the 2-year term thing is a one-time thing.
Right.
I'm just suggesting that maybe we just eliminate D, and E covers that for both districts, right? So E, because E you say, so you just eliminate D, which is a redundancy of E for District 1 specifically. And you would say, in each election held in or after November 2022, council members who meet the qualification, blah, 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 shall be elected to a 4-year term. So you're back to 4-year for everybody.
I'm okay with that. If you want to do it that way, that's fine with me,
It's just
too.
simplifying, it's just for
Okay.
the sake of voters.
Does anybody have an objection to eliminating D and implementing E, changing the date from 2024 to 2022? So we're okay with that? Keith, you want to keep that in your motion? Can we keep that in the motion? Okay. Is there any more discussion on the motion? There's public comment. David Carey, if you want to go ahead and take the podium. We're going to eliminate.
Thank you, committee members. In my note, I talk some about the issue of district residency requirements. Mostly, I want to just kind of give you a background of what I saw was already in general law, and that the one new sentence that was being added in the first paragraph of Charter Section 600 looked to me like it was mostly repeating that. I did have a concern that maybe in addition to reiterating what's in general law, that it was that sentence was strong enough that it would also eliminate the exception. It would override the general law exception regarding somebody who was drawn out of their district because of redistricting. I think what City Attorney Boyle has suggested as adding some additional wording there, I think would take care of my concern in that regard. So thank you for offering that suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
Steve Chesson. It's very important that there be no ambiguity in the charter amendment. And you all understand what your intent is. But you have to put yourself in the mind of some candidate reading this thing 4 years from now, 8 years from now, and saying, oh, this is ambiguous, I'm going to sue because I think I should run now or whatever. It's important that you be very clear and explicit. and not, well, we understand what we mean. We know what the intent is. The intent, you got to make sure that the intent is actually clear and not ambiguous to someone who hasn't been following the proceedings of this. This isn't about protecting people's feelings. This is about making sure that it is unambiguous. The language I wrote, and I'm okay with your not using the language that I wrote, but I wrote that language to make it perfectly clear and totally unambiguous. I'm concerned that the language you're proposing might be ambiguous. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I apologize for missing earlier meetings. I just am probably asking more of a question than a comment, making a comment. If I read this correctly, it sounds like in 2018, District 2 does not get a vote. And in 2018, District 1 gets 1 vote, but District 2 gets 3. And so I think there's always kind of this situation. I'm just wondering why we don't just do in 2018 1 from each district, and then in 2020, we can do 2 from each district. So like I said, it's probably clarification that you probably went through already. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Based on public comment, is there any other discussion that the committee wants to have before? Yeah.
Might be for Brian. The method of section 700.1F, I want to understand what it means by enacted by an ordinance of the city council. I want to know what that means.
It means that the council will have to adopt an ordinance dividing the city into districts. And then they'll have an ordinance that will also explain how you redistrict.
I get that. Now I'm concerned it's a little, I think it's ambiguous. It's not specific enough, like who's going to do that? Is the council doing that?
It will be up to the council to decide how to do that. We don't want to put it in the charter.
So that's not going in the charter, okay.
The method by which you do it won't be in the charter. The council will be defining the method by which you create the districts.
Okay. Do you want a further comment, or are you good?
Goes back to 7 people making a decision on something. My concern is it goes back to 7 people making a decision on something. That's my concern. It's like, here we go again. Hello, echo.
Okay. Beverly, and then Keith and Hassan.
Okay, so I looked at that too, and I was wondering what it all meant. But I think I understand it's because if we put how we want to do the districting as a method in the charter, then if we ever want to change it, it has to go back through the charter to get amended again, right?
That's correct. We were concerned, when we did discuss this, and the committee was concerned that if there were some kind of court ruling or something, and we had to change the way we did the districting, or something like that, that we would, we'd be up against a charter amendment at that point. Also, we have to remember, if we're going to have these districts in place by next November, we have to get going. And we can't wait for this charter amendment to go through in June to tell us how we're going to draw the districts in the future. So we were thinking we could start working on the ordinance and the districts before the charter amendment would even go to the voters, so it could be ready in case this passes. Because remember, the districts are supposed to be in place they would have to be in place by literally July of 2018, because that's when people start filing for the November election.
So then the other question I had was the other ordinance that the city council can make establishing the ballot format and the rules for casting and counting the vote. Wouldn't that be kind of designated by the county registrars? Oh, I'm sorry, 702C.
Again, that was for the purpose of, because we won't know exactly what the county will be able to do, we wanted the city council to be able to do that by ordinance so that they could be nimble in terms of reacting to the ability of the registrar of voters to have a certain method of voting. So in other words, the charter directs the council to make sure we have a single transferable vote by 2020, but it says in case we don't, then it'll go to a later date. It's again to have flexibility that any details that we might need about telling the registrar of voters how to set up that single transferable vote would be able to be done by ordinance rather than trying to have another charter amendment to explain it further. If you get too detailed in the charter, then you're kind of stuck in the language that we're all sitting here believing that this is all going to be able to happen in 2020 by a certain method, but if it doesn't, I think it's important that the council have the flexibility to be able to enact an ordinance that fits the intent of the charter without having to do another charter amendment.
Thank you.
Steve? I'm sorry, Keith.
Thank you. I mean, for some of these, the city can't redistrict in a way that violates state law. There are requirements for fairly representing the people. I mean, there are constraints in the city. And I think the same is true for, by ordinance, establish the ballot format. The city couldn't establish a ballot format which was blatantly misleading or discriminated against some set of voters. So, I mean, there are still protections there. This doesn't give whoever's on city council carte blanche to say only people named Tino can vote, for example. That was a question. I'm pretty sure I know the answer,
No,
but
the
I
answer
think
is
you
you're
do know
right.
the answer.
No, the council is bound to the charter just like everybody else. And I mean, you have lots of provisions in the charter that are fleshed out in the municipal code because they're general principles, just like you have an entire body of the United States Code that's based upon the Constitution. And not everything flows from the Constitution, but you don't put all the details of every working of government into a constitution or a charter. You want the legislature to have some latitude to carry out the intent of those documents in a way that can grow over time. No, but you're right. Obviously, they couldn't. I think the whole idea of the ordinance would be we'd probably follow much of the safe harbor provisions in the California Voting Rights Act. There's a methodology set forth in there for drawing districts when it's mandated for a general law city, and I think it was the intent that we would follow the same type of methodology to come as close as we could to staying within the Voting Rights Act.
Go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, I'll address specifically the concern that Ms. Silva had raised with regards to 700.2, that the City Council shall by ordinance establish ballot format and rules for casting and counting votes. It's important to note that the City of Santa Clara contracts with the Registrar of Voters to actually do all of that for us. We don't recruit our own poll workers. We don't put the ballot out. They, in fact, do all that. The City of Santa Clara, and especially the Registrar's Office, are mandated by the State Elections Code to follow certain rules. So it would be very difficult for them to do something which would be pejorative in a manner that may be viewed as hostile. Were the City Council to choose above and beyond the obligations of the Elections Code or the obligations of the Registrar of Voters and the way they implement their elections, to say, forget it, we're going to do it on our own, they'd have to do it as a standalone election, which would be exponentially more expensive than what are already very, very expensive elections in the City of Santa Clara, reaching into the mid-six figures if you have a regular City Council election. So even if they were to want to do something like that and could figure out a way to do it by law, it would be incredibly cost prohibitive. So that's something which, based on the explanation that the city attorney has made, and also the general constraints of how functionally it would have to happen, I think it's fairly safe.
I am second guessing myself right now on a change that I suggested. When Steve got up and said that we need to be very explicit. And as somebody who was sued before and had to read a lot of law to deal with that, I can see how it can be misunderstood or twisted to suit somebody's need, somebody who don't want it to run. So with regards to 700.1 D and E, I actually think being explicit about District 1 and every 4 years after, and then in E specifying District 2 and every 4 years after, because in no other place, either in 701 or in 600, does it specify that District 1 will vote on 2022, 2026, 2030, et cetera, and that District 2 will be 2024. Sorry, I made a mistake myself. So 2022, I had it right? Okay, yeah, sorry. And then District 2, see, District 2 would be 2024, 2028, 2032.
So we
You got it?
We got it.
Yeah, okay. So I think it would be very explicit and very unambiguous to just follow here where it says, in the election to be held on November 2022 and every 4 years thereafter, the voters of District 1 shall nominate, da-da-da. E, in the election to be held in November 2024 and every 4 years thereafter, the voters of District 2 shall nominate, da-da-da. But don't write da-da-da.
Can we just add that, Brian? Okay, so are you okay with that, Keith, in your motion? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and ask for the vote. All those in favor of Steve's motion?
Keith's motion.
Keith, why do I call you Steve? Sorry, Steve, I'll call you Keith. I know, sorry. All in favor? Okay. So the motion is to adopt what Brian has put forth and also to adopt the changes. And let me see if I understand the changes, and if I don't, let me know. You want to do it, Brian? Knock yourself out.
I'll do whatever anybody wants me. So in the election, so this is what D would, this is how D would read. In the election.
No, go to 700.1. That's where we started.
700.1D.
No.
No?
Members of the city council shall be elected by districts.
Period.
Yes, go ahead.
And then there shall be 2 districts to be known as District 1 and District 2, with elections to be conducted as follows, colon.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Okay, then D would read, in the election to be held in November 2022, and each election every 4 years thereafter,
Yep.
the voters of District 1 shall nominate and elect 3 council members who meet the qualifications set forth in Section 600 of this charter for 4-year terms each. And then E would read, in each election held in or after November 2024, council members who meet the qualifications set forth in this section 700.1 and in section 600 of this charter shall be elected for a 4-year term.
So I think we just agreed to a slightly different change on E, which was to mirror D
Yeah.
and to have it be clear that it was about, so like to have the same language as D about District 2, so the slightly different year,
Yeah, I think
just
what,
to be, you know,
Brian, what we were getting
Bootstrapping
at
ourselves.
was, yeah, is that D and E are the same with the exception of the year
And the district
and
number.
the district.
Sure.
Okay.
And there was also one other thing to the motion, which was adding some language in 600 about the district line crossing over a candidate living in that district. Correct?
No, I don't remember that.
Yes, the language?
No,
Yes?
that's the one that we agreed that we would add a section to section
yes.
700.2, where we would add a section similar to, and I can do this, I can just come up with this. Remember, this is going to go to council, and they'll do the final language check, And everybody who's been coming to these meetings can show up at the council meeting for any last-minute word changes. But eventually, we have to get this going because otherwise we'll never get the districts done. But yeah, we were going to solve that by adding the section about mimicking state law, which talks about if somebody moves, not if somebody moves, it's the moving issue, if the line crosses over. If your district changes and you happen to not be in the district anymore, you still get to fill out your term. Yeah, we'll put
Okay.
language in there. We'll put language directly into the charter.
But
So
there
I'll
was
call
one
for-
last one, which was 700.2B, just clarifying that single transferable vote is a form of ranked choice voting, whichever language you were using. I
Right,
forget.
and then I'll fill in the blanks on the election code section.
Okay.
Okay?
Is there anything else before I ask for the vote for the 7th time? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Mary? You sure? Okay. Keith and Hussam?
Or Stephen Hassan. It's fine, either way.
Or, Steve and Mary. I mean, does it really matter at the end of the day? I mean, it's, I mean, yeah, there's so many citizens watching right now. I'm sure that our political futures are in jeopardy. So, hold on, I got it. I'll get there, Jody. Just hold on. Is there all in favor, any against? And is anybody abstaining? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. All right. Let's move on to discussion of potential charter amendments. And this will be a discussion amongst the committee. Last time we talked, there was a motion to eliminate A, B, and I think C. But then we brought it back because we wanted to have further discussion. So I don't know if we should probably take it in order. We should probably go with the police chief first, just so we can stay on task with the police chief, and then move to the clerk, and then move to C and then D. So I'll open the floor up. If anybody has any comments or wants to discuss anything that has to do with converting the police chief to from elected to appointed, Keith. I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's a good, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for catching that. Thank you. Okay. So, City Attorney, you wrote a memo on that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So can you give a summary again of your position on abandonment, the abandonment of office?
What, just the abandonment issue, you don't want to hear about the residency requirement?
Right, just the, I mean, we don't have the residence.
Well, I think
Well, yeah, we can, just go ahead and do both.
There's a bunch of issues, even today, there's people talking about, what happens if somebody moves out of the city, for example. How do you there's no real procedure for dealing with that. I looked at some state laws, and there's really no way to, I don't know really how we would deal with that. So until you know how you would enforce it, I don't think it makes sense to start having special rules about it. And I certainly don't think it belongs in this charter amendment, because you could really start having some real confusion among the voters if we start talking about abandonment of office and procedures for that in the same charter ballot measure that you would have for this. So if you want me to continue to look at this and perhaps suggest things, I could start, I guess, researching other things. I'm running out of resources in terms of getting the the district's done, I'm going to have to start really turning my attention to working on the ordinance and bringing that forward. And I'm not sure that the abandonment of office issue is something that we could actually vote on in June of 2018. So that would be my, I realize I'm kind of ducking the issue at this point, but I'm just trying to look at all the things we have to do and whether you really want me to tackle that and what order you'd want to look at that in. So that's where I'm at.
Keith?
And I guess I just have some questions. I mean, I kind of have this intuitive feel that you should be a resident of Santa Clara if you want to be on the council in Santa Clara, or if you want to be the chief of police or the city clerk. So I'm from Wisconsin. I currently live in Santa Clara. I lived in Santa Clara for 25-ish years. If I decide to move to Wisconsin tomorrow, still own my house in Santa Clara, to me, it's hard to prove where I live. It's hard to prove where I'm a resident. I spend 6 months in Wisconsin. The 6 months when Wisconsin's weather is acceptable, and 6 months here. So I don't know what the city would do there. If I moved to Wisconsin and register to vote, which you can do in Wisconsin after you've been there 3 days, and if I apply to be on the ballot to run for governor in Wisconsin, which you can also do after being in Wisconsin for 3 days, and I'm elected governor of Wisconsin, it's unlikely. If I'm governor of Wisconsin, can I simultaneously be a council person in Santa Clara? Well,
You
I'm
couldn't
not
be
sure if
regis-
according to these rules.
That
It's
isn't,
I
that-
believe
that- no,
against
that's
federal
not
law to
true.
be
I mean, the charter says.
registered to vote in both
The
places.
charter says, no, it currently says, in order to hold office, you have to be a resident of the city and a qualified elector of the city.
Okay.
The issue isn't whether you would be legally allowed to. The question is, how do we prevent you from showing up and trying to be a council member here? Now, one way is you could have a recall. You could say, okay, that person is taken, can be taken out by the voters. We don't have anything on our charter for removal of a sitting council member or mayor. So I'd have to look at state law. I'd have to look at what else people do. I know there have been issues about people who say they live in a district and their election has been challenged. So you can do that through the court where you're challenging the election because they're not a bona fide resident of the district. Like there was a Board of Supervisors member in San Francisco that got challenged that way. So that's held, that's done in court. But I haven't found anything where you'd go to court to remove somebody because they no longer live in the city. So at this point, what I'm saying is it may be something we want to tackle with a charter amendment, but I'm simply saying in this memo, I don't think it's a wise thing to put it into this particular charter amendment that we just worked on and finished off.
Okay. And I mean, I understand that. I agree with that. I mean, this needs to be on the ballot in June. I guess only some things can be on the ballot in June to amend the charter. But also, just personally, I don't know about the rest of you, but I think if you are registered to vote somewhere else, you should not, if you decide to register to vote somewhere outside of Santa Clara, you should no longer be eligible to be an elected officer of Santa Clara. And if we can do that in the charter, I would appreciate it.
It's
And
already
if
in
that's
the
too hard,
That
then
particular rule is already in the charter. The issue is not whether it's in the charter or not. It is in the charter. It's simply what's the method of removing somebody. That's not in the charter. The only method by which you can remove somebody is recall. There are some provisions where if someone's committed a crime, they can be removed by a grand jury. But those are the two things I've found so far. I haven't been able to look at other people's charters to see if they have other ways of removing people. But I'm just saying it's at this point, I don't think we should put it in this charter provision. And if we want to look at it, maybe we can look at it in the future.
okay, thank you.
As a point of clarification, I think the charter actually says violating the charter is a misdemeanor, and that if a member is convicted of a misdemeanor, they should be removed from office. So I think it's a matter of just question of like, how do you get from violating the charter as a misdemeanor? Because if you're not a qualified elector, aren't you violating the charter?
We have such a good city clerk that I would hope that that would never, ever happen. So I would look to Rod in a common sense point of view and say, you know, do we do anything to ensure that people who want to run for council can prove that they meet the requirement of the charter?
Yeah, so first, let me clarify something, that the requirement to run for office is not just being a qualified elector, but being a registered qualified elector. So you actually have to be registered to vote. If you were to be registered to vote in one place, you can't be registered to vote in another. So that as soon as somebody registered to vote in Wisconsin, they would rescind their California voter registration. So that's, yeah,
That information shared somehow? I mean,
I don't believe that there's any cross-jurisdictional, state-to-state database of that. I'm speaking more esoterically with regards to how the law might flow. And if somebody had moved, like Keith is talking about, to another state and run for governor and registered to vote there, it would be pretty obvious that they'd registered to vote there using Keith's scenario. But in other cases, it would likely be something that was more done ad hoc by the body politic.
Do we not check with the county registrar?
Correct.
To make sure that they are properly registered at the time of their
Correct, we do.
application? Yeah.
Somebody has to file nomination papers.
Right.
In the nomination papers, you
Certify that.
you certify the fact that you live where you live, you write your address down, that you're a registered voter. That then goes to the registrar's office. The registrar's office checks whether or not, as they're validating the signatures,
Exactly.
whether or not somebody lives there. And I believe I'm getting in my city charter mode. I believe that there's an obligation under the city charter that the city attorney enforces the elements of the city charter and city ordinances, which somebody faster than I am with regards to a city charter may want to check. So I think you may actually have the enforcement mechanism for something like that built into the city charter at this point.
Okay. So do we need to have any more discussion on this topic?
A question about Mary's point, because you were saying like if you're violating the charter, it's a misdemeanor, and if you have a misdemeanor, then you, yeah. Huh? Where? 1801, apparently.
The violation of any provision, 1801, the violation of any provision of this charter shall be deemed a misdemeanor and be punishable upon conviction by a fine. But then later, but there's also pieces about the city council members being removed for such convictions, but maybe not for all. That might be requiring like more than just a misdemeanor. I don't know. I have to go back and look.
Oh, did you have, go ahead.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
So I can understand how somebody, when they're running, they have to be a qualified and registered elector of that district. In our case, I'm talking about districts. But in the case of them moving after they've already been elected, is that then in violation? I mean, is there any provision, even in the amendments that we were proposing to put on the ballot, that would say they must remain a qualified and registered elector of their district throughout the duration of their term?
That's the part where it says to hold office.
I see.
The part that we just worked on, it says, let's see where it is.
Yeah, so it's underlined in the first paragraph of section 600. No person shall be eligible to hold the elective
Right.
office.
So the
hold
charter
is
requires
okay.
you to live in the district to be able to hold the office.
Got it. Cool, thank you.
And folks, the section I had referenced was section 908, city attorney. It's on page 16 of the city charter that was provided for you. Section 908F, that the city attorney shall prosecute on behalf of the people all criminal cases for violations of this charter and of city ordinances. So I think the combination of all that makes that fairly patent.
Teresa?
So if I understood what Brian just said, though, is it's premature to have this discussion because there isn't time to do anything for the charter amendment for the upcoming election. So you're suggesting just tabling it right now until we get through the other recommendations. Is that correct?
If you want to keep it on your
agenda.
list of things to work on, yeah.
And then in regards to residency, it looks like your memo said that it was 30 days by case law. I think it was, there was a case that it was 30 days?
No more than 30
No more
days.
than 30? And
Right.
then Mr., I mispronounce his name. Yeah, Mr. Carey, yeah. I thought he made reference to 15 days. Did I read that wrong? It says the candidate must be a registered voter of the district at least 15 days before filing for candidacy. So I'm just curious, is it 15 or 30, and are we going to add that to this charter, or are we simply going to wait? What's that?
Before filing for office, but you file for office
Right.
much more than 30 days before the election.
Yeah, well, so it's kind of by default, you pretty much are going to meet that requirement by the way it's written. Okay. Yeah. Because if you file in July and you're certified in July that you live in the city, in November, you've then technically lived here for 3 months, so that's greater than 30 days. So, or 15, so I think we're okay there. Okay, is there any further discussion then on this? Go ahead.
Not on this, but before we move to number 5 real quick.
Okay.
Okay, because one of the things that Mr. Carey brought up was about vacancies. I know the previous charter committee, which I was a member of, we talked about vacancies and the method of filling in vacancies. Do we need to add a line in section 703, City Attorney, about the filling? So the way we set it up and was approved by the voters last November was that any vacancy can be filled by a 4/5 vote of the remaining members of the city council. And if they fail to select somebody with a 4/5 vote, then within 30 days after the vacancy, then a special election is held. So there's no language in here about how that special election is held. Does there need to be a line in there added that says special election to fill the vacancy must follow the provisions set forth in 700 or 600 and 701 and 2? Or is that not necessary?
There's nothing that says the person has to live in the district.
Right, in 703, it doesn't say anything about districts, right? Because we had no districts and we talked about vacancies. So does it just need to say the person, sorry, a person appointed or elected, or even appointments, actually. A person appointed or elected
Well-
to fill a vacancy holds the office for the unexpired term of the former incumbent,
Well,
but
we-
must
if we
follow
had kept the language the way I had written it before we started changing it, then we wouldn't need to have changed, then we wouldn't need to change it. But now that we're changing it to read "and every 4 years," remember
no,
we
I'm
added
not-
"and every 4 years"?
But there's nothing that says that somebody appointed to a vacant spot needs to live in the district
Right.
for which they're being appointed.
600, because they can't hold the
They can't hold the office.
Yeah,
They
but
have,
yeah, that's already covered. They can't hold
Yeah.
office unless, right,
Okay,
okay,
I'm good.
okay, good. Okay. So we can move on to item 5. So let's take it in the order that it's agendized. So if we just go with convert police chief from elected to appointed position, and I'll open up the floor for discussion.
If there's a desire on the part of the committee to change it, I'd be happy to give you the whole history of why we have what we have and the accountability things that are in place. But if nobody's interested in doing that, we should move on to the next agenda item. So there I go, with a short history of why we have what
I'd
we have.
actually like to hear about the,
I would be interested in hearing a brief history of why we have an elected police chief.
Okay.
And also
And
the
your-
accountability part of it.
yeah, that's.
Yes, of
that's-
why. and
That's
the-
what I'd like to
and
also
the
hear.
pros and cons from your opinion. I have some written down that I thought about, and we'll see what the rest of you
Absolutely.
think.
And I know, almost everybody here on the committee, but for those of you I don't know very well, I was the police chief for 10 years, went through 3 elections, so I'm kind of familiar with this whole process. Um, It was very, very common for police chiefs to be elected in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and before that. Much like we elect our sheriffs, I think it's 58 counties by California Constitution, we elect our sheriffs, we elect our judges. So electing somebody in law enforcement is not as unique as maybe it kind of sounds, although Santa Clara is the last city that elects their police chief. So we did that for many years, up until, it's kind of interesting, 1952, there was a charter change, and they said the city manager was going to elect their police chief, and that had been a movement in the 40s and 50s. And so in 1952, the charter was changed and said where the police chief was going to be appointed. So as soon as the charter went into effect, the acting city manager at the time promptly fired the chief. And that very same year, the folks in the community were so outraged that occurred, they changed the charter back to make an elected position, and it's been the same way since 1952. So it's been stated in a previous meeting that electing your chief limits the diversity, and that's not actually accurate. Frank Sapina was elected in 1952, very Portuguese, very Hispanic. He was followed by Manny Ferguson, some of you know him. Manny, Hispanic and Portuguese, he was then replaced by Frank Vasquez, very Hispanic. He was replaced by Charlie Arola, Caucasian. He was replaced by me, Irish American, Irish English guy. And then came Mike Sellers. And the folks in Santa Clara have always elected a command officer in the election. Last election was very close and did not include a command officer, but historically speaking, they've always elected somebody who had previous experience as a command officer. So if you look at the current chief, Mike Sellers, if he chooses not to run again, his command staff is Dan Winter, Caucasian, Kurt Clark, African American, Wahid Kazem, Middle Eastern Afghani, and Steve Burris, Portuguese. So if any of those folks choose to move into town, that diversity continues. So I would disagree about the lack of diversity in the office. Then we come to the issue of accountability. So you get this elected chief, he can do whatever he wants, right? No, there's a lot of controls on him. Certainly there's the recall. It's never happened, but it could happen. But the greatest accountability is the fact that the city manager is the appointing authority. Everybody beneath the chief of police is appointed by the city manager. So one day the chief of police says, I think we should all wear Nazi swastika, head armbands as part of our uniform. City manager says, yeah, I don't think so. We're not doing that because everybody in the police department works for me. So there's great accountability and great control from the city manager. In fact, there was a point where the city manager and the police chief really didn't get along all that well. And the first thing the city manager did was start meeting regularly with the assistant chief of police, who she had appointed, to make sure that the police department kept going in the way that we've always wanted it to go. So there's great accountability there. There's accountability in pay, and there's a subdivision of the city council that determines what the chief of police's pay is, and so they can hold some accountability there. And then there's a question of the average tenure. The average tenure of a chief of police in the state of California is less than 3 years. And part of the reason for that is because they're elected by, or they're appointed by either city managers or mayors. And so you get a new mayor, they bring in their own person. They bring in a new city manager, they bring in their own person. And so, I teach this leadership and ethics class for law enforcement. And what I've heard in this class is when you know that there's going to be a new mayor or a new city manager, and this police chief comes in and wants to institute these new policies, come on, we'll just wait him out. He's gone in 3 years. We don't have to do this community-oriented policing stuff. We don't have to do all these other stuff because this guy, his tenure is likely to be short. In Santa Clara, going all the way back to Frank Sapina, 20 years. Manny Ferguson, I think, was 8 or 12. Arola was 6. I was 10. So there's some, stability in the organization when we do that. And finally, there's, again, kind of related to my earlier point, is the question of if you're not going to elect your police chief, who does? Is it the city manager, whose tenure nationwide is less than a police chief's? We've been very fortunate in Santa Clara with Jennifer Sparacino, 25 years, Don Von Raceville, 25 years before her. But I don't think that's the future. So you get this turnover. Is that the person that chooses the police chief? Is it the mayor? We're not really set up to be that way. But I think that would call for even more problems to make it even more political than the city manager. So that's kind of the history of what we've done. I think people who might be opposed to a city or appointed or an elected police chief say, well, we're the only ones. Well, we're the only ones that do a lot of things. We're the only ones that have one of the few that have a electric utility. Thank you. We have an NFL stadium. Santa Clara just does things because it's just what the community wants and what benefits the community. So it just kind of all works out. So clearly I'm biased in favor of the elected chief. The last thing I'll say is every month all the police chiefs get together and the sheriff gets together and we have this meeting and we talk about different things. And, I tell them, people call me up as police chief and say, hey, Chief Lodge, I voted for you. I wanted to run this by you. And that was kind of like their opener because, hey, I feel free to call you because I voted for you. Other police chiefs, those citizens never get beyond a sergeant or a lieutenant. They don't get to the chief to ask that question because that's just the way that it's set up. But these people, it's kind of the opener, like, hey, I voted for you, so I get to talk to you. And the answer is, yeah, you do. And I'm betting those other police chiefs, they would take that call, but their bureaucracy is just not set up that way. And so, you walk through Central Park at Art and Wine Festival, hey, I got a question for you. I voted for you. And it's just kind of I guess, icebreaker, a willingness to talk to their chief of police. So that's my history.
Thank you. Anyone else? Marcus?
Yeah, I just want to say, with an elected police chief, I don't know how other people my age feel, but I know, going through high school and stuff, you're scared of cops. You're scared you see a cop and you think you're in trouble. It wasn't until I met Mike Sellers during the campaign, and yeah, I was campaigning myself, but Mike Sellers was still, campaigning and talking to me and stuff. And now I feel really comfortable with Police Chief Sellers, knowing him, listening to his stance on things. Not only I, but my family and my friends, people that would probably never walk up to an appointed police chief because we have no idea who they are or what they're really for unless, we're actually listening to them. Then again, it goes back to being scared of police officers. But I also think we have a really unique thing here in Santa Clara to elect our police chief, be closer, because the police chief campaigning goes up to your door and talks to you personally. Especially, I know sellers walk door to door and talk to people, and makes people comfortable. And like Steve Lodge said, you get that comfortness with calling them up and bringing up issues to them. And so I think that's a huge benefit that we have here in Santa Clara. And from what I hear, Santa Clarans love their elected police chief. They love they have that power. So I'm in favor of keeping it elected.
Keith?
Thank you. I mean, I wrote down a whole bunch of pros and cons, and I remain very conflicted about whether the chief of police should be an elected position. I think I'm the source of your comment about diversity, and if it sounded that way, I don't want to imply that an elected police chief means there's limited diversity in the position. I understand that. One of my cons is there's a limited pool of applicants, and I think you kind of reiterated that. You said it's always been a command staff individual, and there are 4 members of the command staff. Currently, none of them could run for police chief because none of them live in Santa Clara. So if one of them wanted to run, they would have to buy a house in Santa Clara or rent an apartment and move here. And that to me is a con of an elected police chief, right? The city manager could appoint Officer Winters, I forget what his title is, even though he's not a resident of Santa Clara. For my other cons, I mean, you also mentioned this, that the police department doesn't work for the police chief, they work for the city manager. In essence, to me, the city manager, I think, could call everyone that worked in the police department and say, don't listen to the police chief. He or she has no authority that I know of over the people in the police department. And that, to me, is a weird situation. Similarly, I don't think the police chief has a direct control over the budget. I mean, the city council could decide we're going to allocate money to these capital projects and not these capital projects. I think salary is civil service side. I'm not sure if they could punish individual members of the police force by arbitrarily changing their salaries. But I think they do directly set the salary of the chief of police. And I mean, I think the city council could decide next year the chief of police gets $1, and then we would have an elected poverty line chief of police, which to me is also weird. And my last con, I mean, to me the big one, right, is the chief of police can be at significant odds with the city council and with the manager of the city and everyone else. And that's a con. I kind of also sometimes have that under the pro, because in some sense, elected chief of police could act for the benefit of the residents of the city while being at odds with city council, the city manager. Under pros, right, it's that one, right? An elected chief of police can be significantly more independent than an appointed one, because an appointed one can be gone on Friday if the city manager decided that, or could be gone on Wednesday morning after a city council meeting if the city council decided that. Under the pros, I said an elected chief of police can be recalled. I mean, if something terrible happens, it's a lot of signatures, but it's a way that the residents of the city could make a change that otherwise they can't make on their own. And the last one I wrote down during your talk, which I hadn't thought about, was that since the chief of police needs to campaign, in some sense they need to be more open to the public at least every 4 years when they are actually running, and hopefully that carries forward. I mean, all of that is a long way of saying I'm conflicted. I don't know what I would do. From my perspective as a charter review, I I mean, I tend to not want to suggest changes to things that aren't broken. I'm not quite sure. I think that electing our police chief is a broken system, but I have concerns and would like to listen to what everyone else says to see what they think.
Thank you. Yes, Teresa.
So I would be in favor of keeping the police chief as an elected position. I think it allows a lot of transparency. I think it's probably one of the few opportunities that the citizens get to be connected to what's actually going on, because the information is easily accessible through the electoral process. I would be concerned that an appointed police chief may not have the same sense that he's working for the citizens of the city rather than to try and keep his job, depending if he comes up without the skill set that an elected official would have to present to the electorate. You could have an appointed official who got appointed for reasons that may make him easy to work with for the people that are appointing him, rather than for the fact that he had the right skill set to be an effective police of, the chief of police in our city. I also think that would probably impact the decision-making within the department, because there is a level of a sense of onus to the electorate when you have to go to be re-elected. And I really appreciate what Marcus said about when the police chief is out on the streets connecting with the people, it makes our community just work better, because people feel that we're all in it together. So we have enough appointed positions that having a standalone independent position, I think, works well. I don't think it's a broken system.
Thank you, Marcus. Not until everybody has had a chance to speak. Yeah, Beverly. But yes, you can make a motion.
I agree. I don't think it's a broken system. I think that that one concern that you brought up, Keith, about, if they aren't engaged with the city manager, they're at odds with them, that will come out loud and clear when people watch council meetings and things. So I think those kinds of things are evident to the citizens, and I think at that point, the citizens have a choice when the next elections come around. Or if it's that egregious, they could be recalled. There are ways, but I'm in favor of keeping it elected also.
Thank you, Hassan. And Saskia.
I also knew about this whole thing about where the city or the chief of police, as well as the city clerk, where the city manager can, they are the manager and the one who hires everybody who reports to either of those positions. And it's really weird because it's like, then they become like the Queen of England. So like they're just a ceremonial position, but in practice that doesn't really work like that, right? Everybody still reports to the chief of police, or, in the clerk department, they report to them. But that option is there, I guess. I don't know how residents would feel about a city manager who tried to usurp the police department when the residents are happy with how the police department is going. Because the residents can't recall a city manager, but the council can. They can, fire the city manager. So that's really the one thing that I'm conflicted about. I really like that we have an elected chief of police. Whether you agree with an individual or not, that's where, the ballot box is where you make your voice heard. The recall option is there if enough people are upset. That's always an option. As a committee, we have to propose what we think is right for the city, but at the end of the day, we have to propose something that we believe will be voted on by the voters. And I really don't, not only do I not think it's the right thing, but I don't even think the voters would agree to having the chief of police change from an elected position. I don't. I really think Santa Clarans like that they elect their chief of police. So not only do I think it's the right thing to have our chief of police elected, I just don't think, even if we proposed it, that it would pass. I just don't think it would pass. And then finally, I'm originally, or my parents are from Egypt, And I look at, what happened recently, if you're familiar with what happened recently in Egypt, where there was a coup by the army. I mean, I'm not saying any way, shape, or form that a police chief in any city in the United States would take a coup over their city, but I really believe in democracy. No, I really believe in the power of democracy and being able to choose who represents you. And when it works, it's beautiful. And I don't think taking that away from people is doing a service to the people. I think we need to have as many positions as possible that are elected by the people to serve the people. And I think having our chief of police serving the people and reporting to them, you don't have to go look at Egypt. If you look at what happened in Oakland, how many chiefs of police did they go through in how many few months? Because their chief of police did not represent the people and what they wanted. I can't see ever happening what happened in Oakland happening in Santa Clara because we elect our chief of police. So that's my thought. I think it's a great system that we elect our chief of police. And if you don't like the person, vote him out the next time. That's how democracy works.
Thank you, Saskia.
I wanted to say that I think the best thing about maybe why we're discussing this is because of what happened last year, that we actually had a race for the first time, and it made a lot of us look at what's going on. So it did open up our eyes, and I think Jody brought up last time we had a meeting. She suggested that perhaps we look at some of the requirements in the charter. That may not be a bad idea. I don't know if we can do that. I do understand the concern that you have to live in the city to be a chief of police. I can see that that's a problem, and especially in today's economy, it's a huge issue for younger people, perhaps, if they've got that as their ambition, and let's face it, hopefully when you go into the police force, that is an ambition that one would have, Doesn't mean that you'll get there, but you would have to, at least have that. I really like the fact that we elect a chief of police. I'm quite passionate about it. I think, I think last year was a prime example of why we have that, and I don't like this Queen of England idea. Coming from a colony, that at the end of the day, actually, everything, whether you realise it or not, you can have an elected government, but it makes no difference because if the Queen says she doesn't like it, bad luck. So, so having said that, I do like this system, and I will speak on, if we bring up other systems, I will actually always say elect, 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 have choice, have choice, have choice. That is the beauty of this country, and I think sometimes as a migrant you see that more than somebody that is born here and forgets that. All right, now you have ways and methodology in which to denounce the police chief if you want to do that. Then maybe we have to tighten up the charter a little bit too. Maybe we have to review that. That would be a good idea, but I do not want to change the system. I think I'm very proud of the fact. I like telling people in Australia, we elect our chief of police. I like that.
Thank you. Thank you. Jody?
Steve, I really appreciate your comments and your perspective, because I also, like others, was kind of conflicted. And I think about the limited pool, and I think about like the budget. You're not really in charge of your own budget. You're not really in charge of your own personnel. And it seems like there's so much potential for so many problems, and yet we don't have those problems. It's been running, at least from my perspective, it seems, to be running fine. And sometimes the chief disagrees with people, and sometimes he doesn't. And I feel very safe in our city, and I feel very confident that our police department is well-run and is doing what they need to be doing. And so I am wondering, do we need to fix something that's not broken? That it does seem to be working really well. The only thing is, in response to the last election, is I'd mentioned about tightening up the requirements, because you said that in previous elections, it's always, I think you said it's always been a member of command that's been the next person elected. When the chief decides not to run again, it's been a member of command, but there's nothing that says it has to be. And yet it does seem like you want somebody in that position who really knows the role. You know, unlike city council and school board, you elect somebody and they may have no clue what's going on, and they can pretty quickly come up to speed, or it'll be pretty obvious that they're not. But it seems like with chief of police, you don't want somebody who's clueless about the job, or not even clueless, and I'm not reflecting on anyone in particular, I'm just saying, it seems like you want somebody in that role who from day one is off and running and is not gonna, you know, turn things upside down and cause a lot of problems, that you want that continuity. Just like if you were appointing the person, you would tend to have that continuity. So I still think that we should put in more requirements beyond just what the state says a sheriff has to have, which is what our charter says now. I think we need to tighten up our requirements for the chief of police, but I do think it should remain elected.
Thank you. Teresa?
Yeah, so Jody hit what I was going to say, but also if we're eliminating qualified candidates because they don't live in the city, is that a possibility that we could remove the requirement that they live in the city? I mean, I don't know how big an issue that is, but I think you mentioned that a bunch of the upcoming probable candidates are not eligible right now because of where they live. Is that correct? Yeah.
Go ahead.
So a couple of historical issues. It was interesting, up to Jody's comment, up until the mid-1990s, anybody could run for the chief of police. And they thought the same thing you did, Jody. That doesn't make any sense at all. When the guy from the Elks Club ran, he was a submarine captain. Remember that? So it was, the charter was changed. It says you have to have the same qualifications to run for police chief as those of a sheriff in the state of California. And that just means you have to be a cop for a certain amount of time. That could be increased. You could say, you know, the governing agency for law enforcement is the Peace Officer Standard and Training, or POST, and they give different certifications for management and supervisor management. You could require one of those. As for the residency requirement, you know, Santa Clarans love that kind of stuff. I mean, they just when I first ran, a guy from San Jose PD ran against me, and you know, poor guy was doomed from the beginning because Santa Clarans didn't want somebody from the outside. But you know, that could be changed. The certifications could be changed. And I guess my final point is in the mid, I think it was, the city clerk would know better than I think it was 1994. The question of whether we should elect our police chief or not went to the voters and was defeated by like 79%. I mean, Santa Clarans just love that stuff, and as Jody points out, it's just kind of worked for us.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I think to the comment that Steve just said, if you're good enough to be a sheriff of our county, you're good enough to be the chief of police. So I think if we're, well, I mean, well then, yeah, I did. Yeah, I have. We may think it's a little too lax, but then we got a problem with all our sheriffs. So, I mean, do we need more qualifications? Have we seen an issue? Again, if it's not broken, why do we need to fix it? And I do agree that I think our chief of police should live in the city. They're, you know, here for our city, working for our city. And if there's any, God forbid, any issue or disaster, that they're here, that they don't have to travel from out of town to come and make it and kind of respond right away, right? They're here. So I think things are, again, don't fix it if it ain't broken.
Thank you, Mary.
So, I mean, I think I generally agree with Hassan, and I think that while in some ways I'm conflicted on electing a professional position, and so that worries me in some ways, because I do think there's a lot of expertise that it's hard for voters to learn about and to know about. And in the end, I like to vote a lot. It's really fun. And so I want that. But I also think that it is actually a really good accountability structure. And I agree that keeping the requirements the same makes sense to me because, one, I don't see why we would have different requirements than the county sheriffs, which we also elect. But also, just in hearing what Steve said about the number of command officers, if we were to require, that you are a command officer, then that's a very small number of people. Some of whom none of whom currently live in the city, but even if they were willing to move in, that's still a very small number of people. Okay, one does, great, fantastic. And I'm not concerned about that so much as I also think that there are ways in which people can show skill in management and leadership outside of the workplace that would be relevant, even if they haven't yet had the opportunity to be promoted into a command role. And so it may be that the voters see somebody who's, for example, taken on a leadership role in the union or taken on a leadership role in their community organizations or in other spaces as a better candidate than someone who's meets a management credential but maybe is actually not very good at their job.
Thank you.
Right.
Saskia, you had something?
Question to Steve then. So that changed at some point that they had to live in the city? Is that right?
No, that they had to have the same or the same qualifications as the sheriff. It's always been you had to be a resident.
Always had to be a resident. So the guy that ran against you happened to live in San Jose? That was just,
He was a San Jose cop but lived in town.
oh,
He
I
lives in
get
Santa
it, I
Clara.
get it, I got it, all right, okay. So, what if we had something that you had to move into the city within a certain particular time period? I mean, we've done that with, it seems to, we've done it with the city manager, it seems.
Well,
Just a,
actually, that happened to me. I mean, I was raised in Santa Clara, my wife and I, but the only house we could afford when we moved in was in San Jose. And so we lived in a couple of houses in San Jose. And then when my career was developing, we said, if you want to be chief, you got to move into town. So we did. We had a great house out in Almaden. But we moved into town because that was the career path that we wanted to go on. And so the other command staff members and beneath the command staff, they all have that option to do that. Prices are extremely expensive, I get that, but that's a choice you make.
Thank you. I'll throw in my 2 cents. I was very conflicted because of accountability. That's something that I was struggling with. But what kind of puts me over leaning towards keeping it the way it is a couple things. One, I think the police chief has to report to the people. So if things are not going well in Santa Clara, if you're a friend of the city manager and things aren't going well and we're not happy with what's happening, whether it's code enforcement or whatever the case is, you really have no ramification. I mean, there's no remedy to remove somebody that you think is not doing a good job. Second, I don't necessarily like the fact that the city manager or the city council has that much influence over the chief. I think when you have a group of individuals, it takes 4 of them to basically get the chief to do what he or she wants them to do. And I do think that arm's length distance from the council and from the city manager is a good thing. For instance, we have a new city manager. And the most compelling reason that I want to keep it the way it is because I've done a lot of ride-alongs. I've been through the academy. I know a lot of the cops. I have lunch with them a lot. And here's the bottom line for me. I don't want somebody from another city who doesn't know how we do things here coming in and trying to tell us how we're going to do things going forward because they happen to be friends with the city manager or they happen to be friends with the mayor. We hire 1 out of every 100 applicants in Santa Clara, so our standards are infinitely higher than any other city, and that's why everybody wants to come and work in Santa Clara because our standards are so high. Our pay is fantastic, but our standards are so high. And so, that alone for me, for instance, somebody from San Jose coming in hasn't spent 1 day on our police force is going to come and tell us how we're going to run our police force going forward. Now, what is his paradigm? Well, he worked in San Jose with a force of maybe 1,000 officers, and so on and so forth with a certain chain of command. In Santa Clara, we have what, 150 sworn, maybe 120, whatever it is. It's significantly different. Okay. The other thing is, I wouldn't remove the requirements, and here's why. I think if you have a sergeant who's been a sergeant in Santa Clara for 5 years, or somebody who's been a beat cop for 20 years, I would argue that the beat cop probably knows more about how to do things in Santa Clara than say a sergeant. Now, I understand the politics are involved and the responsibilities, and so on and so forth. But I think when it comes to diversity, if you look at that chain of command and those direct reports, there's 4. Okay, and granted they are a little bit diverse, but when you only have 4 to choose from, 4 that are eligible, I think that really dwindles down, and it really does take a direct hit on diversity, because either if you have 4 Caucasians, but the rank and file below is mixed, you're kind of saying to those folks, I'm sorry, but you're not eligible unless you get to a certain spot. And then it really becomes political with a police chief, because then all of a sudden it starts picking and choosing who that person wants to move up and who they're going to promote, and then your politics really start. Okay? I do think the police chief does have a lot of power over the force. I think the police chief makes a lot of decisions that affect our guys. So I don't necessarily agree 100% with Steve that, that everybody reports to the city manager. I think that's great on paper. I don't think that's really the way it works in the real world. I don't think anybody on the force would argue that question. I think the police chief has a ton of influence, and as he or she should, right? But primarily because I want our chief to be someone from our force, and I don't necessarily want to see the council or the city manager have the sole authority to replace somebody. I mean, you could be replacing somebody every 2 years. And it's really not fair to the person who comes on and gets maybe a year or 2, and then they're fighting for their job. And then are they really doing their job, or are they fighting to save their job? So, I mean, there's a million things we could go back and forth on, but for that reason, I'm definitely for keeping it the way it is. If there's no other comments, we can go ahead, and Marcus, you can make your motion.
I'd like to make a motion to keep chief of police as an elected position.
I'd love to second that with Steve's permission.
Independent review of.
Or you can second it. Go for it. Seconded. I tried to kill it last time, but.
Would you the independent review? No. I want to get through this. Yeah. Okay. I didn't hear the motion. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, we voted.
It really doesn't matter if I heard it or not.
No, I want to make my motion to keep the chief of police as an elected position.
Okay. And who seconded the motion? Hassam, all in favor? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And abstaining? Okay, so it's unanimous. We have 12 minutes. I don't know if that's necessarily enough time to get to the city clerk position, unless somebody wants to.
I'd like to move that we maybe extend to like 9:15 so that I think we're on a roll with the first one, and a lot will apply to the second. If people are up for it, I'd like to continue. Make a motion to
Second
extend
that.
till, well, can I say 9:30 but we actually finish it,
your
try and
motion.
finish earlier? That would be my motion, to go till 9:30.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Okay, we'll go to 9:30. So same format as we did for the police chief. I'll open it up for discussion. Actually, Rania did have a point, and I want to go ahead and let her. She was talking about, we were kind of talking really quick about an independent evaluation, if you will, of these positions and outside. So I'll let Rania go ahead and explain what we were talking about prior to taking the vote.
I just wanted to point out, I know it is part of your packet. It's an informational memo. It's listed as agenda item 6. And just wanted to point out that, as the committee is analyzing and vetting each of these items, and hearing from former elected officials and potentially current elected officials,
there is also an option to hear an independent review of these items in order to have a comprehensive discussion on this. So.
Did everybody understand that? Okay. So basically, so if I hearing you right, you're saying that somebody would come in and do analysis of, like an outside consultant would come in and give us an unbiased pro and con of, say, the city clerk of being elected versus appointed.
Seems like a lot of time, right?
Yeah, go ahead. It's just, Ronnie is throwing it out there as it's an option if the committee wants to go that route. I mean, I get the sense that we've kind of, there's a little foreshadowing as far as what's going to come next. So I don't know that we need to go there, but I think, in all fairness, I think she wanted to point that out, that that is an option to the committee if they want to do it. We can take a straw poll real fast, and if anybody would want an independent, I guess unbiased, if you will. Not that yours was biased, Steve, by any way. I don't want to infer that yours was biased, but would anybody be interested in that? Or do you want to move just to the discussion
I have a
of?
question, though.
Okay.
The question is, last time when we met, I actually suggested that Rod give us an idea of what he does or what he's, I don't know, have you prepared something for us, Rod?
I would just like to suggest that, it would clearly have the appearance of a conflict of interest
Yeah.
for the city clerk to be presenting his own case. He's actually sitting, unlike Steve's position, where he's no longer in the office, you have the office holder here. And it just seems, if you want your decision to have credibility, and as an unbiased decision, it would probably appear better if the city clerk did not participate in the discussion at the table. He would be free to, make comment as a member of the public, but, to avoid the appearance of this being a fair and open discussion, I think it would be better if the city clerk did not do that as a member of the city staff advising the committee.
I think last meeting we did ask him to speak about his accountability for his position. I think we all agreed with that, if I was correct. It's not about pros or cons of his position or anything, just about the accountability.
I'm not saying there's anything illegal. I'm just saying that it has the appearance of a conflict of interest for him to be making his own case.
Yeah, I would.
Since he's sitting in the office.
Yeah, I would, and no offense to Rod, if it was anybody, it doesn't matter that it's Rod, and we went to high school together. It has nothing to do with that. It's simply that I think at the end of the day, if we allowed Rod to make his case, I can tell you that I know there'd be some of the council members, my phone would ring tomorrow morning and say, "What? You're chairing the meeting. Why did you allow that to happen?" And I think from an optics perspective, as much as I think Rod would be truthful and forthcoming, from an optic perspective, if people said, well, gee, the city clerk gave his depiction of what he does and the value add and so on and so forth, I think people would probably raise an eyebrow. So for that, I think it would be, I would agree with the
But
city
he
attorney.
is allowed to talk as a resident, right? Correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
He can speak as a resident during public presentation, just like
Mr. Doyle did.
Yep, Mr. Doyle did last week. Okay, I got you. Go ahead.
In view of that, I would like to say that we postpone it till we have somebody come in and talk about it, because I don't want to make a decision on something without some sort of value, like we had from Steve. I want to have some sort of input from, and I'm independent, unbiased person. I mean, we as residents really don't have anything to go by. I don't know that Rani can talk to it. I don't know if Brian can talk to it, and that's not what I'm looking for. I want to have an idea of what that position does. So that requires somebody coming in to talk about it. And then in that case, I don't think we should continue the meeting tonight on this topic.
Well, we already made the motion to continue the meeting.
I have
go
a
ahead.
question to the city manager's office.
That's wrong.
Why is, I mean,
We still have other issues to discuss after this one too, Saskia, so.
I mean,
we
it's the
still can
motion
talk.
that was made. I mean, I can't undo the motion.
No, but we don't have to talk about this topic.
Yeah, we can
If
talk
she
about
wanted
other
to-
ones.
No, we don't.
Let's put it on there.
Again, we don't have to. I mean,
Question to the city, because this memo is coming from the city manager's office. So was this, I guess maybe the question is to you, Ruth, or maybe Rania, if you have the answer as well, I don't know. But was this intended for us to discuss for both the chief of police position and the city clerk position? Or was this just a general offer from the city manager's office?
It's a general offer.
Okay.
It's for general offer for all the items if needed.
Okay, thank you.
The only question that I would have is are we discussing the role of the city clerk? I mean, is that what you want to know? What the city clerk does on a daily basis? Or what is it that we would get from, I mean, I'm just trying to clarify what it is we would want from an independent.
The offer is from the city
Yeah,
manager's office. Yeah.
So my,
No, but is the offer to help clarify what the role of these elected officials do? We've already talked about the police chief one. So is the offer then to explain the role of what the city clerk does, or is it to explain the pros and cons from the
Right.
lens of an unbiased perspective?
Well,
And does the city manager's office have somebody in particular in mind that they would like to bring in? Or is this just like a general offer?
This is a general offer, and there isn't anyone in mind just yet, but it would be an outside consultant.
I'm going to go to Beverly first, and then Marcus, and then Jody.
so just to be fair, though, if we took that offer up just to consider city clerk, then I think we should have done that for the police too. Why? I mean, in all honesty, Steve even said he's biased, right? And so if we're gonna do and look at things this way, I think we should have done it for the police chief as well. Not that I would change my mind, but I think that's what this was referring to. The other thing is, I wasn't here last week, but it was kind of clear from what I was listening to that people weren't opposed to keeping it the way it was. It was this one issue of accountability that I kept hearing coming up, but not that it was, I mean, it sounded like most people were in agreement that it should stay elected.
Okay.
I was just thinking, in order to save time, maybe we should do a straw poll on where people stand right now, because, I mean, that's a whole nother meeting that we might have to add to get somebody in here and take up a lot of our time if we're all our minds are already made up. So maybe we can take a straw poll on where we stand right now.
I went to Jody, I think. Yes, it was Jody.
So I see a difference between advocating for it being elected versus appointed is different than understanding what the role of
Exactly.
the position is. So to me, I don't see a problem with having Rod talk about what are the things that his department does and what the city clerk and auditor in particular do. I agree that once we start discussing it, that he shouldn't be influencing that discussion, but I don't think telling us what the job is all about, so we get an idea of just what's involved and what are the, what are the experiences that would make somebody have the qualifications for the role. I don't see that that would be an issue for us to hear him say those things.
I would still be against it. I think it's a bad practice to.
I'm just not sure who would know better.
Well, if there's an independent consultant, then the city manager would have to qualify that person to come in and talk to us. But to have somebody tell us about what they, I mean, and again, no offense, but if Rod's going to be here, I'm just going to put it out there. To have somebody tell us what they do is, and who's qualified and who's not. To have the person who's in the seat tell us who's qualified, I think puts him in a no-win situation.
And that's not what I'm asking. I'm not saying for him to say who's qualified. I just want to understand better what.
But that's what you said.
No, just the opposite, that I want to hear what he has to do so that we can figure out if that would mean it'd be better for an appointed versus an elected person. But I don't think any of us really know what the position does.
Rod has come and talked about exactly what their position, what their role does, but, I'd have to go look for notes and everything, but I'm not going to do that, and I don't feel that's in my job to do that, and I get where you're coming from, Jody, and I really appreciate that, thank you.
Steve?
I tend to agree with Jody. I think there are two distinct and separate questions here. One is, what does the city clerk do? It's not going to be helpful to me to have an independent consultant come in and preface every statement by saying, well, I don't know what you do in Santa Clara, but generally speaking, this is what a clerk does. That doesn't help me. That's one question. The second question is whether that person should be elected or not. And having somebody come in and talk about how, you know, a third of the city clerks in the state of California are elected and 2/3 are not, and here's the pluses and minuses. I'd enjoy that conversation, but I think they're separate questions.
Let me go to the assistant city manager, Ruth, real quick.
Thank you. So I think that part of the reason why we didn't have a lot of material prepared, we just, for me, my first meeting, I just wanted to hear where you're at. And certainly the manager's office could come in at your next meeting and talk a little bit more about the specific role of the clerk and then what the office function does here in the city of Santa Clara. The offer of the consultant is a kind of a general offer, depending on the nature of you have a lot of items here that you have on your list that you wanted to talk about priorities. And some of those things we might want to offer to you to take a look at, because there's a lot of things that could, depending on how in-depth you want to go, create a substantial amount of research or work for the staff. And so that's why we're saying that, we might need to have somebody kind of help us generate all of that for you to get together in a certain period of time. So, going full circle, I think that having the manager's office actually provide some kind of overview on what the clerk does here in Santa Clara, we could do it on one step. And I totally agree that it doesn't make sense to have a consultant come in to tell you what it is that the city clerk does. We can do that certainly here, but we would like to prepare a few more materials and then make that presentation. If there is a sensitivity, and I think that we've heard that there is a sensitivity about having the incumbent make some kind of statements, it might behoove the committee just to consider that there are some doubts even here at the table, and that what that might mean when it translates out to the broader community, and that, give us another meeting to bring the materials back.
Keith?
Thank you. I'll kind of echo what I heard Jody say and amplify that a bit. If we want to know what the city clerk in Santa Clara does, there's one person that knows that better than anyone else in the world. It's the current city clerk. And we could ask someone else to tell us what the city clerk does. If that's someone in the city manager's office, then they probably have a reasonable idea. If that's an outside person, then the first thing that outside person is going to do is go talk to our city clerk and ask our city clerk, what do you do? And then they're going to write that down, and they're going to charge us $500 an hour, and then they're going to come here and tell us what Rod told them. Right. It also seems weird that, for good or bad, if the committee chooses to hear from past and current elected officials, it is recommended to also seek independent review. We heard from our immediate past elected police chief, and we didn't get anyone from outside to tell us, hey, is it a good idea to elect your police chief or not? And I suspect if we asked someone, hey, is it a good idea in California to elect your police chief? They would come in and say, no, it's not, because you're the only people that do it. And we all sat here and unanimously said, well, that outside person, we think they're wrong. And I am happy to hear Rod tell me what Rod does. I have a reasonable idea. I've known Rod for 10 plus years, and I read the news, and I am okay if he gives a brief, high-level overview of what the city clerk does.
If that's what this committee wants,
I'm in favor of it.
I'm not going to stop the committee from having Rod explain what he does. But I will say that from an optics perspective, this is not a best practice. This is not something that if I were advising any of you, I would say this is probably not something that I would put my name next to. If you have the incumbent describe what they do, and I've known Rod for 30-something years. He's an honest guy. He's not going to do anything under the table. He's not going to do anything shady. I don't worry about that. But I worry about the incumbent. It would be like Sellers coming in here and telling you what, he does. And, when you hear from what somebody does, right, how do I say this? What do you expect to hear from them? I mean, what do we expect to hear from Rod that is going to necessarily change our mind on whether or not he should be voted or not? I mean, we all made some pretty straightforward points.
You're talking about voting. We're talking
Hold on a
about-
second. Can I just finish? Can I just,
You're getting it.
can I finish?
Sure.
So what I'm saying is, if that's what the committee wants, that's fine. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to tell you that you can't. Okay, but I don't think that it's appropriate to hear from the incumbent. Now, with that, as straw poll, how many want to hear what the city clerk does from a functional perspective? Everybody wants to hear from the city clerk. So I'm taking a straw poll, and I'm saying I'm not going to stop the process, right? It's just my opinion. I mean, as chair, it's to facilitate the meeting. If the majority of the committee wants to hear, then it's not up to me to say no.
Can I put in my 2 cents?
Yeah.
I think it's a bad idea to have Rod tell us what he does. I think it just looks bad. I mean, Rod, I like him. He's a great guy, but, the vultures are gonna come and have a feast on this thing, and it's not worth it. Like, we may even take a straw poll, and we may all be in agreement with what our final decision might be anyways, but it's just gonna look terrible because of the process that we got there. I'm not opposed to somebody coming in, maybe the city manager's office, maybe our city attorney's office, coming in and telling us what the city clerk does here in Santa Clara. We could have a city clerk from another city come and tell us what they do, with us understanding the nuances that Santa Clara is a little bit different. I just don't want to hear it from Rod. I just don't think it's going to look good. It's gonna reflect bad on us as a committee. It may reflect bad on him in the future too. And I just don't think it's worth it. I really don't.
Chris?
I just want to agree with that, and I agree with you as well. The optics on that is not going to be good at all. And if you look at the, from my time that I've been here in this city, when you look at the political climate around here, that's not going to be good at all.
I'm going to go to Saskia first, and then
I would
and then
agree
Steve,
with that,
and-
but you
and
should have done
Hazel?
that previously. You should have done that with Steve and shut Steve down. You can't do one. I'm going to play
But Steve
devil's
is not.
advocate.
But
It
but
doesn't
Steve is
matter.
not in
It
the.
doesn't matter.
It does.
It doesn't. It
He
looks
is not
the
an elected
same.
official sitting
It
in
looks
office right
the
now.
same.
He's
Well,
not an elected official sitting in office.
I'm
It's
happy with
different.
this. I'm happy to go this way. I'm absolutely happy to go
But
this way.
it's not apples to it's
it
apples
does
to
feel
oranges.
like apples to apples.
It
It's
can
gonna
feel
look
like
like
it,
that.
but he is not he is not the appointed or the elected police
Saskia,
chief.
if our previous clerk came and told us what the
Would you have
the
a
clerk-
problem with
I
that?
would not have a problem with our previous. Who was our previous clerk? Sorry, I haven't been here long enough to know, but
Whomever.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I wouldn't mind the previous clerk coming and telling us what they do. I just don't think it looks good for our current clerk to tell us when he's sitting there.
So then, if you agree, then what is your argument? What is the point? I'm just trying to understand you.
Throw this at us, and you want us to discuss it now or not? I mean, I
Well,
would
then when were we
suggest that
supposed to discuss it?
Then don't discuss it tonight and bring it up another night. That's exactly what I said from the get-go.
So what if we table this to another night and have this same discussion?
you're thinking.
What is that discussion going to look like? It's going to look like this one.
No, it's not. You bring in somebody else and have them talk about it.
That's
We have
assuming.
to direct them to do that, Saskia.
We have to direct them to do that. I can't just say, stop this meeting, and I want you to do that, Saskia. I can't do that.
Well, then I'm making a motion that you stop it right now, this discussion, have somebody else come in, but I don't want, as a resident, I certainly don't want to pay $500 for somebody to come in and talk about it. That's a waste of money.
But you're assuming that it's going to cost $500, and you're
Well,
assuming
whatever
that
it
somebody's not going to get the job description, and somebody from the city is not going to come in
But you know
and
what? You're just making
and do
arguments
that.
now for the point of making arguments. You get what I want.
So
May
you
I
have a
suggest
motion?
something?
Is there a
These
second for
tensions?
the motion?
Can you clear?
So the motion was to stop this discussion and table it for next meeting. Chris seconded the motion.
Wait.
She made a motion.
With
I don't know. Ask her what her motion is.
So just my opinion on this, I'd also just like to see, I don't want to see it from Rod, and I'd be most comfortable with seeing it from our own city staff, like the city manager's office. I think that would help with both your concern about maybe paying someone outside of the city, and also give us, I think that the city manager's office has a good handle on what the city clerk does, or at least, has a good idea.
Thank you. Steve, and then Marcus?
I just want to
And
go
then
back.
Mary, and then Teresa.
I want to go back to Marcus's earlier point. Is there a will in the committee to change the clerk's position from elected to appointed? If there is no will to do this, we don't need to talk about this.
That's exactly what I was going to bring
Well,
up.
that's,
I've been waiting for moments to mention that.
well, there's, we have a motion, so we have to stick to the motion.
She's withdrawn her motion, so.
Okay, so the motion was drawn. Is that acceptable to Chris? Okay, so it sounds like the committee wants me to take a straw poll, and we want to understand if we are going, if there's any, I guess, well, I mean,
Well, I would
somebody
do
could
that.
easily, I mean, Marcus, you can make the motion if you want to.
And instead of doing the straw poll?
Wait,
Oh,
sorry.
okay, so can I?
So before you, okay, go ahead.
Well, let him make his motion, and then we can have discussion.
I make a motion to leave city clerk as an elected position.
Okay.
To be clear, if I'm not going to be asked to present before you guys vote, I'm going to leave the room. If there is a point at which you would like additional information from me as the incumbent, I'm happy to return and participate in the conversation at the level at which
Thank you.
the committee would like.
Thank you.
I'll
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second this motion.
Okay, Steve seconded the motion. Is there any discussion?
Yes, we should have discussion, just like we had with the chief of police item. There's clearly people in the room who want more information. I brought it up last meeting that I didn't think any of these things needed to be on the table, but clearly there are people who want to discuss it, so I think we should definitely have the discussion, even if that means that we bring it back next meeting.
And I'd
But-
like to speak as a member of the public before you
Okay,
vote.
we'll get to public presentation. Teresa?
So maybe we could just look at actually the job description, because really the day-to-day running of the actual job description, what we're going to vote on is on the merits of should it be elected or should it be appointed. And really the basic job description should give us all the information we need. For those who need more information, I think many of us probably could already vote, but are we tabling that? I'm a little confused now. Doing a straw poll.
Oh, no, I made a motion.
No, there's a motion.
Oh, there is?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can discuss the
Okay.
motion.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, so is there, Rania, online, is there a job description that we could just read out right now? So that we
The
would all.
city charter, there in fact is on page 14 in
So
section 903.
Then we have the information we need, it seems like.
Yep.
Correct, section 903, city clerk, powers and duties. Would you like me to read it aloud? Because it's kind of long, but I'll try to read it clearly and not too slowly. The city clerk shall have the power and be required to, A, attend all meetings of the city council and be responsible for the recording and maintaining of a full and true record of all the proceedings of the city council in books that shall bear appropriate titles and be devoted to such purposes. B, maintain separate books in which shall be recorded respectively all ordinances and resolutions with the certificate of the clerk annexed to each thereof, stating the same to be the original or a correct copy, and as to an ordinance requiring publication stating that the same has been published or posted in accordance with this charter. C, maintain separate books in which a record shall be made of all written contracts and official bonds. D, keep all aforementioned books properly indexed and open to public inspections when not in actual use. E, be the custodian of the seal of the city. F, administer oaths or affirmations, take affidavits and depositions pertaining to the affairs and business of the city, and certify copies of official records. And G, have charge of all city elections. The city council may, in its discretion, appoint any other officer or employee of the city as city clerk and grant such person additional compensation for the performance of such duties.
I would like clarification on that last part. That was just read. I mean, if it's an elected official and then it says the city council may, in its discretion, appoint, what does that mean? I'm confused by that entire sentence.
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I think it means, I think it means the city council can basically take away a lot of the clerk's duties to make sure that they're done correctly.
If there was a performance issue, I guess, right?
Well, there may be other reasons
Or
why
for
they don't.
whatever
I mean,
reason, their discretion.
I can just tell from your discussion that there's a lot of things that you don't know what's going on about how things happen here. So, you know, I mean, you're really making this decision in a vacuum, and you really have no real basis to make the decision. But it's a very uncomfortable thing to talk about with someone sitting in a room and talking about what they do and don't do, or what they're supposed to do and what they do adequately or not adequately. I mean, it's difficult. So
That's not talking about a person versus the role.
no, I know, but it does allow for the city council to change. And in fact, the city manager, it's very difficult to talk about, but I think there are other people doing things that maybe the clerk should be doing. Let's just put it that way.
Other people,
Saskia, go ahead.
other people or other people in his office or?
Well, the people in his office are employed by the city manager.
Okay. So
I just feel like there's something amiss here, like there's another agenda. That's what I feel like. And I feel attacked on that, and I don't like that. And I think there's something going on that none of us understand. And I don't know if it's the city is doing this, council is doing this, but I feel like there's an agenda. And I don't feel like this is about us as residents. I feel like it's about somebody else's agenda, and I feel offended by that. All right?
Well, and also, I think it needs to really be clear that we need to talk about the position, whether it should be elected or not the person. If he's not doing his job or whatever someone's trying to imply, there's a class here to take care of that. So I get offended by that. I think we really need to keep focused on what we're here to do. And if we need to get a description on what he does, besides just what's in black and white, maybe somebody from his office should come and talk, who knows best. Maybe the assistant city clerk.
yeah, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. Is I'm trying to avoid the public coming back and saying, how could you make an objective decision when, you know, regardless of whether they hear what Rod may or may not say, or whether it's Rod or Bill or Tammy, it doesn't matter. When you have that person speaking about their position, the optics of it is, how could you make an objective decision based on the information that's coming from the person who's in the office, whose job right now is being determined, or the suggestion is being determined by this committee to go to council as to whether he's going to be elected or whether he's going to be appointed. I mean, I just, if I were from the outside looking in and this group heard from the city clerk or the sitting police chief as to what he or she did, I would say you guys absolutely have lost your mind. You've lost your objectivity. How can you make an unbiased decision when you clearly have somebody, whether they did it or not, it doesn't matter. It's that when you hear from the horse's mouth, how do you, I mean, it just to me is just not a good precedent. That's my 2 cents, Mary, and then Saskia.
I hear what you're saying, Tino. I think to Teresa and Bev's points, my issue is that, you know, the city charter says this is what the city clerk's job is. Perhaps maybe it would be relevant for us to get information from the city attorney or city manager about other places where things are laid out as to what the city clerk is required to do in, say, ordinance or handbooks or things like that. But I think it's for the same reason that Tino points out about why it's inappropriate for Rod to talk about it. It's clearly the case. I think Saskia is onto something, that people have real issues with the way the current office is being run. That's not, I think, as appropriate of a discussion. And so it's not, it doesn't feel to me that we can trust city staff to be objective in giving us a report. I do feel like we can trust city staff to be objective and to tell us precisely what duties are enumerated in various other places besides the city charter.
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to add that I think that beyond what was in the charter, as far as the general job description of the clerk, that the office has much more expansive roles. And then so going back, and then we could certainly be prepared again to talk about the current role of the clerk's office, the duties that they have, and the workflow that they're supposed to take care of, and then benchmark that if you want with a few other clerk's offices, just to give you an idea of what else people do. But then I just wanted to note that, in fact, that the charter, it describes the general roles and responsibilities, but then it is more expansive as to what this office does here.
Right. And just, I agree with what Mary's saying 100%, because it goes both ways. And I think the only way I would be comfortable of staff doing this presentation is if they simply stuck to not whether or not they feel the job is being done well, or whether or not, whatever it has to go with the person's, whether or not they feel like, well, we think it should be this, or we think he should be doing more of that, that would be inappropriate. But to simply objectively come in and say, this is what our city clerk does, A, B, C, and D, would be absolutely appropriate for staff to give that. But any opinion as to how they feel it's being run, how he's doing, anything along those lines would be extremely inappropriate for staff, because you're right, whether we want to admit it or not, there are politics at play. Let's not pretend there's not. There are. Saskia, did you have your hand up?
I did.
Go ahead. And then Hussam and Marcus.
And again, I'm going to state very clearly, there clearly seems to be an agenda. I don't know whose agenda it is. I don't want to be a part of it. I feel that if there is a problem, then that last sentence needs to be taken upon by the city council or the manager or whoever it is. I don't want to be involved in something like that. I wanted to know exactly I said it last week. If you had whenever we met last time, I asked specifically if Rod could do something. Why wasn't that brought up then that could not be done? I'm a little offended by that. I'm offended by the fact that I feel we're being used right now, and I'm not happy. And I don't think that's our job. Our job is to look at the charter. We were doing that quite nicely, and now we're being politically used.
I guess I'm going to go back to what Hussam originally prefaced this entire discussion of the motion with, which is I think we have decided we should have an actual discussion about whether the police chief and the city clerk should be elected. I don't think we have had an actual discussion about whether the city clerk should be elected yet. So I think it's inappropriate to call the motion at present, because once we all vote, we're done. We don't hear anything more. In terms of your point, Tino, about optics, I think an equal number of people can say, you heard from the guy that was police chief 18 months ago, and the guy who, if our current police chief moved out of the city, would be the top person you would call to reappoint as police chief in the interim until we could have an election. I mean, excuse me? So, 5 years, sorry. It's
And we agreed that Steve was going to.
Mike,
I'm sorry, Mike.
use your mic.
Use your mic.
And I thought you were saying Mike. I'm all, there's no Mike here. Where's Mike?
It's okay, it's late, we
Okay,
understand.
but last meeting, we agreed to have Steve speak as to what the police chief did. I remember that specifically. I didn't remember to have.
It was about his accountability. It wasn't about his job duties, it was about the accountability of his job that we agreed on talking.
It was who oversees his job.
Yes.
So
That's what it was.
from an optics perspective, it seems we were treating the two differently. Steve is a member of this committee, so clearly he gets to speak when he wants to speak, so that's a little different. Rod is not a member, right? He speaks at our invitation, at our request. But it is now 9:24, and we adjourn in 6 minutes. And so I would suggest that our current motion should be tabled, and that someone should make a motion for the next meeting, assuming that
Then
whoever's in charge of that.
do you want to make that motion?
I'm willing to, but first we have to table the current motion.
Okay, because since we have 6 minutes, there's a number of other folks that also want to speak real quick, so I just want to remind you of that.
Okay, I'll table the motion.
Okay. Who seconded it?
Oh.
Steve or Mike? Okay. Go ahead, Keith. I want you to be able to finish, yeah?
I guess I will make a motion to request that we get additional information at the next meeting about the role and duties of the city clerk. I would prefer to get that from someone who is not directly or indirectly who does not directly or indirectly have to interact with Rod, because all those people, we can say in some sense are suspect. If we had a city clerk who had left office 5 years ago, that would be perfect, but we
That'd be
do
great.
not have that.
I really resent you saying suspect. I was trying to say how difficult it would be,
I'm-
and I don't want to talk about working with the city clerk. I'm just simply saying you need to know something about what a city clerk does. I don't want to be put in that position, and I do resent using the word suspect.
I'm sorry I used the word suspect. I'm not intending to be pejorative, but the city clerk, like the city police chief, currently is independent of city council. And the city council selects the city manager, and the city manager selects everyone else under them. So if I would hope we could find someone that is familiar with the role of the Santa Clara City Clerk and also somewhat removed from day-to-day interactions with the present city clerk. And if that's a previous city clerk, that would be best. City clerk in another city that could explain what city clerks do if those roles are similar, which I don't exactly know. I mean, I would just like to know how I think it's gonna be tough to say we found an independent person.
Okay,
And I wish good luck to the people trying to do that.
okay. Marcus? Thank you, Keith. Marcus?
I just want to make a quick comment. When we were talking about police chief, we were all excited about how we get elect, and we have that power to elect those positions. And then all of a sudden we hit city clerk, and now we're all in conflict. I just don't know how we hit that roadblock all of a sudden, because I feel like a lot of the arguments should have been brought up as well as for the police chief, but we didn't have that stance with the police chief, but now we do with the city clerk. And the motion that I had made was on how we pick the city clerk. It wasn't about the duties of the city clerk or his everyday job. You guys, you guys have been in the city, most of you guys, for a long time, and you guys elected the city clerk before. And I'm sure, I mean, if you guys don't know now, you then didn't know then the duties of the city clerk, but I'm sure you enjoyed electing the city clerk, having that power. So I'm just a little confused on how all of a sudden we got conflict. Just a comment.
No, thank you. Hussam?
Yeah, I want to piggyback off what Marcus said there for a second, because we are talking about the method of whether he or she should be elected or appointed, or whether he or she should be elected or not, regardless of what the alternative is. And we have in section 903 a very clear description of what the city clerk powers and duties are. And that's what we're discussing with regards to the city clerk. What that role may or may not have evolved into currently is not what the charter is not what the charter tells us what the city clerk is, what their role is or is not. There's also the last line, which talks about how the city council, again, may, in its discretion, appoint somebody else to be city clerk, even though we elect our city clerk. And all of the employees in the office of the city clerk report to the manager. So really, like I said before about the police chief role, it is in writing a ceremonial position, because all of those responsibilities can be usurped, in this case with the city clerk, by either the city council or by the city manager, if they decide to, undercut their staff. So there's a lot of things. We can talk about, when we talk about changing the charter, we can change what the role of the city clerk does. We can change that the city council has or does not have this authority to appoint somebody else. We can change that the city manager has the budgetary authority for their entire department. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about whether or not the city clerk should be elected, period. And we have the description of what the city clerk, what their role is in front of us in the charter, and we are not talking about changing that section of the charter. If we want to talk about that, that's something we can bring up. So I'm a little bit conflicted, just like Marcus is, because we're trying to, I mean, I think we're conflating different things, and I feel what Saskia is feeling is that there seems to be something else behind this. We're just talking about whether or not we should elect our city clerk, period, end of story. Not whether or not the offices run well, not whether or not they should have 10 staff members or 20 or 30, or whether the city manager appoints the budget or controls the budget, or whether the city council has authority to appoint somebody else. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about whether or not the city clerk should be elected.
So it's 9:30. Is there a motion to extend another 15 minutes?
I would make that motion because we're going to come back and forget everything we just said.
Okay. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll go for another 15 minutes. Jody?
I think what Marcus and Hossam said was very profound, because we spent a lot of time with the police chief discussion talking about the pros and cons of electing that position. And what we've spent a whole bunch of time on now is talking about what is the role of the city clerk. And we never asked what is the role of the police chief, or what do they do in their daily job, or how do they do it. We know that they have a job. It was, should they be elected or appointed? And we had some really good reasons for staying with elected. And that's why I originally said, let's extend the meeting, because I think this is going to be a really quick discussion. We understand that it was a really good idea to keep the police chief as an elected position. And I think the same goes for the city clerk. I think there's some weird things could happen that don't happen. And it's run really well. We've had our current city clerk, I don't know how many years, but a number of years. And it seems like the people who have done that role have been stable for a period of time. I don't have anything to back that up, but I don't hear any issues with the city clerk's office not running well. And I think people in Santa Clara really like that we elect these type of positions. So I guess I would say we should refocus on what we're here for and look at, should we change that position from elected to appointed? And I would say no. I think tonight we could make a decision one way or the other, and I think we should keep the city clerk to be an elected position.
Thank you. And again, from the chair's perspective, I couldn't agree more with you. My whole thing is that my position was, if we were going to have this discussion, quite frankly, I wanted to make sure that we thought through having the person in office have that discussion. But going back to what Jody is saying, quite frankly, I don't necessarily know that the role of what the city clerk does. I don't know the role of what the police chief does. I don't know the ins and outs of what the police chief does. I don't know what the ins and outs of the fire. I mean, I say hi to the fire chief every morning, right, because he has coffee, and that's about as much as I know. Like I said, there's a ton of things that the police chief does, but that's not what, at least for me, I don't care. Because here's the deal. If Rod leaves and somebody else comes in, hypothetically, gets voted in or whatever, they're going to have the same role. So what it leads to comes down to, and I hate to say this, is the discussion moves towards competence, and I don't want to have that discussion. Because now we're going to ease towards competence versus what the person does. And regardless of what the person does, it's going to be same here on out. And for me, I think all of us have been in the city long enough to know pretty much generally what the clerk does. Now, if they want more clarification and that's going to help them come to that decision of whether or not they should, then somebody has to make that motion. If somebody wants to make the motion to simply keep it then somebody has to make that motion.
Do we have a motion on the table?
We don't have anything on the floor.
No, does Keith have a motion on the table?
No, it wasn't seconded. So I'll go to Marcus.
If everyone's comfortable, I'd love to bring my motion back to the table.
Well, hold on,
Before we do
hold
that,
on, we'll have discussion. So Marcus is bringing it back to the table where he's saying that we should continue to elect the city clerk.
Yes, sir.
Okay, is there a second?
I will second that again.
Steve will second that again. Go ahead, Hassam.
My question before the motion came on the table was that, are there people in the committee, and without putting anybody on the spot, are there people in the committee whom, after knowing what the clerk does, whether that knowledge will influence whether or not they believe the clerk should be elected or not? I know for some people that is important. To know what the clerk does will influence whether or not they should be elected or not. I know for me, I love electing as many officials as I can because I believe in the power of democracy. But for other people, they may believe that knowing the role better will influence knowing what the role of the clerk does better, knowing better what the role of the clerk does will influence their decision whether or not they want them elected or appointed. So my question is, does anybody in the committee feel that knowing more about what the clerk does, whether that will influence their decision or not? Otherwise, then let's just move forward with the motion.
Keith? And then I want to have public presentation as well.
I'm not going to say knowing what our city clerk in particular does on a day-to-day basis because it help me, but Steve gave us a background of why Santa Clara has elected its police chief and how long it has, and interspersed with that clearly was his experiences, at least, as an elected police chief. I'm not sure we have gotten the same background for the city clerk. As far as I know, it's been elected forever, but they could have started electing the city clerk in 1993, the year before I moved to Santa Clara, and I would not have been paying attention. So I do not have the same background yet that I think I have for when we talked about the police chief. I'm not sure if knowing that background is going to change how I eventually vote, but I mean, I think without that background, I'm voting without information. And so I would prefer, I mean, I would have liked to have had that discussion for the last half hour than the discussion we've had.
Is there any further discussion? I'll take public comment. If there's any public comment. Do you want to go ask Rod if he has? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think the mic's on out there. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? He doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to, but it
no,
sounded like he
because he's a
wanted-
member of the public. He can choose to talk after the vote if he wants to.
Got it.
No.
Okay, run it for yourself.
But that's not in the charter. Is that in the charter? Is he supposed to be doing that? Just asking. By ordinance, yeah. Okay, if there's no other discussion, no other public comment, then I'll call for the vote.
I'll have some discussion. I have some discussion. I want to reiterate what I said with the issue of chief of police. Our city clerk is the keeper of the records. They make sure that what is discussed, oh, this is my understanding. So again, I'm not an expert, but this is my, I'm not a former city clerk like Steve was a former chief of police, but my understanding is the city clerk is the keeper of the records. They're the ones that, you know, when somebody 50 years from now wants to see what it was or does a public records request to see what it was we discussed or what the city council discussed, they are going to look at the records from the city clerk. They, thankfully, due to technology, they can probably watch the video as well. But they, what the city clerk records is the official record of the city. And that is a position of huge public trust. Just like the chief of police is a position of huge public trust. They are responsible with the safety and security of everybody who lives in the city. Yes, the city clerk is not responsible with the safety and security of everybody in the city, but the public record is important for everybody in the city because that is what governs, or is what the official record is of what our governing body, the council, has agreed to do or not do. I think any position of public trust that can be delegated to the voters to make that decision is a good thing. It's democracy, it works. If we believe that we have an incompetent chief, city clerk, whether it's with a current or a future one or whatever, we have ways of, clearly we have more ways than recall to change that situation. Our city council can appoint a city clerk of their own to usurp what the elected city clerk does. Clearly, our city manager can constrain the budget and completely, you know, manage the entire office of the city clerk independent of the city clerk. I think the recourses are there for us to address an incompetent city clerk. But I think from the perspective of a position of public trust, somebody who answers to the public, and it is not a it's always going to be a political position, whether they're appointed or not, but at least they answer to the people. I believe that the city clerk should be an elected position. And if people disagree, then I'd love to have that conversation, which is what we should have been doing for the last 45 minutes.
Thank you. Is there any other comment? Okay, we'll call for the vote. All in favor of Marcus's motion? The motion was to simply to make the recommendation to continue voting in the city manager. City clerk, not the manager. City clerk. So let's stay on task. So I'm going to call for the vote on Marcus's motion to continue electing the city clerk. All those in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. If somebody wants to make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Oh, we do have public presentation, yes. Is there a public presentation?
Tino, so that means the rest of the agenda items are in our next meeting?
We're gonna have to agendize those for the next
For the
meeting.
next meeting? Okay.
Are we gonna start the next meeting now?
What other items do we have to discuss? Is it 5C and 5D and that's it? Just get it done. And we probably have to also approve the final language from the city attorney? No? Are we done? We're done. Okay, cool. Great. I'm all for it.
There you go.
Since the committee did approve the language for the charter amendments, we will give an update to council, likely in November, about and present the approved language.
I'd
And-
like then.
And
if-
the review of, I'm sorry, and also the review of the potential charter amendments.
Yeah, so because of that, 5C, I believe, is really important that we, when the presentation is made to council for the language, that 5C be included as part of that presentation. And for that reason, whatever we decide on 5C, for that reason, I believe that it's important that we get that done before it goes to council. So if you intend on presenting that to council before the 13th, then we should probably meet on the 6th. Otherwise, the 13th might be fine, because 5C, I think, goes in, depending on how we vote on 5C, it goes in tandem with, it's not a must-have, but it would be nice to have along with the rest of the discussion. I don't know if others feel the same.
I would personally like to make a recommendation to council on all of these. Rather than being, oh, and then there's two more we haven't talked about. I mean, I respect Jody's standing meeting, and I respect that Hazel may be late, but, we do meet every 2 weeks, and I know Chris will be in New York, but, we have to wrap this up. And I would rather give them a complete report rather than saying, oh, and we still have two more things we're going to talk about. So, I mean, I know we would love to accommodate everybody, but as chair, I would like to see this come to a close sooner than later.
May I?
It is 2 weeks.
We haven't yet adjourned, correct?
Nope.
I do not think 5C will take any substantial amount of time to discuss unless staff has a presentation that they had wanted to make on it. And I don't think I have less confidence, but I don't think 5D would take a lot of time. Is there any willingness to stay until 10 o'clock and discuss C and D? Or do we come back in 2 weeks? Okay, motion to adjourn.
No, you have public presentations.
We have public presentation.
Okay, motion to adjourn after public presentation.
Is there anybody that would like to make a presentation, a public presentation?
No, I'm not, I just happened to, sorry.
Okay. There's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Is there a second? Chris seconded. All in favor of adjourning? Opposed? And no abstentions. Thank you.